So here we have our two body back pieces, and you'll notice on the pattern it says leave open to stuff. The center seam on the back of the body is where you'll stuff the head and the body from later, and so we want to make marks where we're going to keep that seam open. So starting there, or finishing there, and starting here, we want to make sure that that stays open so that we can get in there to stuff later. So now that I've marked that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew along this seam up to there, and then I'm going to move down here and finish the seam off for that last 3/4 inch or so. And then I'm going to iron that seam open so that it's ready to attach to the rear or the back headpiece. So you want to sew all of your seams with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is marked on the pattern as well. The other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that your stitch length, because this is going to be for the body of the doll that you need to stuff quite firmly, I usually put my stitch length at about 1.5, so it's quite a small stitch. The other option would be to double or triple stitch your seams, but I prefer rather to just do a smaller stitch. Okay, so that's the top part, and then I'm just going to lift my presser foot, and I'm going to go to the bottom section and finish off the last 3/4 inch. Making sure that I backstitch to secure the seam on both ends of that opening. So I do have those threads connected because I didn't snip them in between, so I'm just going to snip those so that they're not going to get in the way later. And then I can press that seam open. So I've got the two body back pieces here. I'm just going to press the seam open. So I'll put the right side down and then iron that seam open so that when it's turned right side out, that seam will press towards the inside. One thing it says in the pattern instructions is that you want to make sure all of your fabrics have been pre-washed and ironed before you cut them, so that now when I go to iron it, it doesn't change the size of it at all. It doesn't shrink or anything. So there we have the opening that we'll use to stuff the body later. So I have the back head piece and the rear body piece, so the opening for stuffing it is towards the bottom. I'm going to flip that over so the right sides are together and pin those two pieces together so that I can sew them. I want to make sure that it's aligned properly so it looks like it's in the center of the head piece and it lines up along the bottom. And then same thing with the front head piece, right sides together. I'm going to pin that front body piece on there. So again, with a 1/4 seam allowance, 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to stitch those together. Sometimes the pin gets in the way, so once you have it aligned on your sewing machine, you can take that pin out and just guide it with your hands. Okay, so now we've sewed the body to the head on both the front and the back. You want to iron that seam downwards, and so the way I do that is I'll just hang on to the bottom of the body, and with my iron I'll pull this away slightly as I iron that downwards. Okay, so we have our two ponytails for the hair that we cut earlier, and I just left them together after cutting them, and what I've done is pin them together so that they don't slip. And I've switched my thread to brown to go with the hair, and I've also switched my stitch length to 2 because this isn't going to be stuffed, so it's not as important that the stitch is small. So I'm going to, very, very close to the edge, about maybe 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the ponytail, I'm going to do a seam around the ponytail just to finish it and hold it together. I'll do that for each ponytail. Once you get to the end, you want to just keep the needle down and swivel it so that you can turn the corner. So even with pinning, sometimes you can see that the edge of that is not maybe quite lined up exactly how I wanted it to be. So just with a snipper, I would just trim it so it looks like it lines up nicely. And again from this side, and now there's a nice point on the edge of that ponytail. And do the other one. And again, trim. You could even trim around the curve a little bit if you want. So you can see on the back of the back piece and on the front piece, I've pinned the back hair piece and the front hair piece, and I'm going to stitch all the way around the outside edge and then down along the bottom hairline. For the front piece, I'm also going to stitch all the way around the edge, a little bit closer than 1/4 of an inch for each of those around the outside, so that when I attach the front and the back, the seam that's attaching the hair doesn't end up showing after I turn the doll right side out. So I'll sometimes snip this at this point just so it doesn't get tangled in the back of the rest of the sewing. And at this point, when you've done the outside seam, you can also take the pins from the side pieces out. Now this is the hairline along the inside hairline for the doll. This will be visible, and so I want to stay very close to the edge so that there's not extra felt that hasn't been stitched down. So stay as close as you can to the edge. So there's the front head piece. I'm going to do the same thing now for the back, which goes a little bit quicker because there's not quite as much detail. And again, at the bottom you want to stay very close to the edge because this will be the visible hairline at the back.